Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So, Hound and the Falcon is actually a trilogy to start with before anybody looks at that. And also this cover is remarkably tacky, but it is the cover of the 3-in-1 trilogy edition that I have at home, so that's the cover. The thing about this trilogy is this is the first book, or 3 books, that I ever read by Judith Tarr, and there's always a particular special something about the first book you ever read by an author that you come to like, because that first book, if it's an author that, you read that book and then you say, oh, I want to read everything else, it's a book that will always mean something to you. That you may find that there are other books that you ultimately like better, that, ultimately when you read this book that that you find that it's not as good as you thought it was originally, or that, it's the worst of their books, but there will always be something particularly special, and also, one should always look back on that book and remember the reasons that you liked it, because it's a thing I've taken, unfortunately, because I apparently have no life whatsoever, to watching the so-called reaction videos on YouTube, and among other things, when you watch people, quote-unquote, reacting to Avatar: The Last Airbender or Buffy the Vampire Slayer or whatever, very often the comments are filled with people saying things like, oh, season 1 is awful, but don't worry, it gets better. And the thing is, you can say season 1 is awful, but it must have had something to recommend it, or else the show would have been canceled. And so you always need to look at that first book and say, this is the thing. This is the book that made me say, yeah, I wanted to read more of this author. Now, obviously, if the first book you read by that author was not the one that hooked you in, it was a totally different book that you read because A, someone recommended it, or B, you didn't realize it was by the same author, or whatever, I don't know, then maybe it's that second book. But this trilogy will always have a fond place for me, but to be honest with everyone, I have been putting off rereading this because I just didn't feel like it. It's a bit of a complication with my doing this series, is because, first of all, this has to be books that I read that I liked, which usually means that I want to go into this not reading a book this week for the channel. Now, I will be honest with you all, there are 1 or 2 books that I have in fact read for the channel, other than my special remembrance series for my mother, or the literature books recommended by my dad, but those are a separate issue. I have once or twice, but I will not confess to you which of those books I have read before. This, though, this is a book that dates all the way back for me. Now, because this is actually 3-in-1 books, I have gone to the effort of downloading a picture just offline of the cover of one of the first book, because we're doing the first book today, just so that, I have a cover specific to the Isle of Glass. So, Hound and the Falcon, oddly, is actually 3 books out of 5, because there is in fact a duology with 2 of the characters from this series. 3 of the characters from this series appearing sort of in another 2 books at a totally different time. Maybe 4? You call it 4? Mora's barely really there. Anyways, Mora's barely a character anyhow. So, let's get on to the actual book in question. I picked this particular cover because it is thematically close to the cover that you were just looking at, so it felt a little bit better a choice. Anyways, so Judith Tarr has a tendency to write things stuck in the medieval period in which people have magic elf elemental powers. She writes a lot of historical fantasy. Not all of it, but I'll admit I tried Avarian Rising and it didn't really do anything for me, so I didn't actually finish the first book. But Isle of Glass is about a monk, and he is an elf, or at least that's what they call themselves. They call themselves elven folk. They're, in closer to the tradition of, the Sidhe of Ireland than the Keebler elves, or Santa's elves, if, you don't recall Keebler elves. But, you're talking about fair, beautiful, ageless people with magic powers. He has telepathy when he wants it. He has a certain amount of empathy. He has magical healing powers. The way these are designed, the various fair folk people, the elves, they don't, their power, they have sort of certain things that they can do. The being ageless, being physically stronger than other people, the abilities of telepathy, but Alf is has sort of a natural gift for a natural talent that he discovers later in the book for warcraft, for using weapons, and he has a natural ability at healing and a certain amount of the ability to make prophecy. That is, as he put it, he can see the tapestry and follow threads saying, if this, then that, or if that, then this. It's, that he's able to look at the various potential outcomes and pick a path that would seem to be the best one to follow. Anyways, so, but the thing about Alf is that it's the Middle Ages, and the Malleus Maleficarum is a thing. The fear of, the fear thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, the fear of witchcraft, all of this is very powerful and very alive and well, and Alf has a very fundamental self-hatred, really, because he is brilliant. He's got a really, really brilliant mind. He's a theologian. He's got all this stuff going for him, but he is also very, very beautiful and ageless. And when he was young and thought that, maybe I'm a prince of the elves, I will be a prince elf monk super genius person. But, he hits his he hits his 20s and he still looks like a teenager, and he hits his 30s and he still looks like a teenager, and his 40s and his 50s. By the time you reach this book, he's physically 19 and he is actually mentally 70 years old. And it's a very, very big problem for him, because he's now terrified that he's actually some kind of soulless demon. And it informs so much of the choices, so much of how he thinks about himself. And he has this absolute self-hatred, and it's on every page of this book. And this is a book that's very much about somebody coming to terms with who he is and what he is. Not just, I am a monk, I love God, I believe in these set of particular precepts and so on and so forth, but learning to accept that he's built a particular way. That yeah, that yes, he is in fact an elf, and he has to accept that all these things. One of the most melodramatic parts in this book, and I adore it precisely because it does not indulge in any way any of his meebling about it doesn't involve any of his meebling about how he doesn't deserve things or isn't a real person. And so, he goes on and on about, that I've sinned mortally. I tried to kill a man, and I tried to kill myself. You were provoked, Jean pointed out steadily, though he wanted to cry. I'd have tried to kill that son of a sow, too. It was still a sin. If I can sin, I may not have a soul, Jean. And it's like, dude, if you can sin, you may not have a soul? Like, have you paid attention to any of the theology you believe in? Because, like, the whole point of the Catholic Church is, the point of the Church in general, is saving people's souls from the sins due to the sins they commit. If I am, if I commit a sin and I have to go to confession and do penance, so that my soul can get into heaven, that suggests that I can in fact sin and simultaneously have a soul. The idea that if he can sin, he has a soul is just lunacy. And so Thea, who, by the way, in the next book becomes his girlfriend, and she just has no patience with him. She just has absolutely no patience at all. Logic, says Thea, is a wonderful thing, but you carry it too far. Mouse is a syllable, you say. A mouse eats cheese. Therefore, a syllable eats cheese. And, and after a moment, Alf goes on, and people say that I was a changeling, and demons get him when I was anointed a priest. They all cast a spell on me, holding me as I was then a boy of 17. Nonsense, snapped Thea. Get up and face the truth. You are wallowing. You have been wallowing for most of your life, and tonight you found out you had a temper, by God and all his angels, as if the lowest human cur didn't have one too. Well, even the Christ got angry once and whipped the money changers out of his temple. Have you been trying to outdo him? And that's just it, he's bottled everything up over and over again until he just sort of explodes and flips out. And Thea, at this point, basically has no patience, and as it says, you have been wallowing for most of your life. Even Christ got angry. To sit there and say, well, I got angry, and, shaved a man with a longsword, which, by the way, remains one of the most impressive physical feats I have ever heard of in any work of fiction. It is amazing. Just imagine. And, you do this, and you think that you don't have a soul because of this? And, he sets out to martyr himself in the next couple of chapters, literally. That he sets out to get the Pauline monks, whose job is to basically hunt witches and sorcerers and, halt witchcraft and stuff, and he deliberately gets himself caught by them, just in order to delay King Richard from causing a war on the borders and stuff. And it is just this most remarkable piece of self-loathing. And this whole book is very much a journey of somebody realizing that just because he's pretty, just because he's got this thing in him, just because, doesn't mean that he is in fact fundamentally morally wrong. I hesitate to say this very, very deeply, but there is something of an equivalency that could be considered for somebody who is, I don't know, gay, realizing that this does not in fact mean that they are fundamentally wrong or evil or what have you. I hesitate to say it because it's an extremely delicate area to go into, and but it's about somebody who has this massive self-loathing for something that is fundamental to who and what he is, and learning to accept it and deal with it and realize that it doesn't make him wrong. And at the end of this book, at the end of everything, you have King Richard himself, Coeur de Lion, has offered him a chance to be a squire and eventually a knight. He's had a chance to become Lord Abbot of St. Ruan's. He's had all of these options, and he realizes that he can actually walk away and basically go to find himself, which is how the book ends, with him walking away to actually find himself. And with Thea saying, yeah, I'm coming with. So I'm basically out of time, so I'll see you all next week.